Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Lance, and I'm a Director of Marketing here at Unchained Labs. I'll be your moderator, and thank you for joining us today. We will have a Q&A session at the end of today's presentation, so to ask questions, all you have to do is click on the Q&A button in the Zoom navigation bar at the top or bottom of your screen and type in your question. When submitting a question, please avoid clicking on the anonymous button, so that way we can email the answers afterwards if we aren't able to get to your specific question today, though we will get to as many of them as we can. And now I'd like to introduce Joanna Winkler, Marketing Application Scientist at Unchained Labs. Today, Joanna will talk us through how Lunatic delivers simple, one-step, reagent and standard-free plasmid DNA quantification. And we'll also look at how other instruments can help out in the pDNA production workflow. And now I'll hand it over to Joanna. How's it going today, Joanna?
Hi, Kevin. It's great. Thank you very much for the introduction. Okay, let's start. Let me share my screen with everyone. Here it is. And I need my laser pointer. Okay, here we go. Without the proper tools, pDNA production might feel like climbing to a mountain peak without security ropes. It is like balancing on the fingertips, and if you slip, you might fall and need you need to start the climb all over. So in simple words, you must make sure that everything is okay on the current rock before you move up. The global pDNA production is increasing hand in hand with the development of the gene therapies. However, large-scale production of the high-quality pDNA faces multiple obstacles. The yield of the plasmid pDNA is often low, and purifying it from contaminants which are similar in size and charge is not easy, and it's not cheap. Additionally, pDNA has to be brought to the right concentration and at the viscosity that will not compromise downstream steps. So no matter when you stand in the supply chain, if it's providing the initial pDNA or doing the large-scale production, removing the contaminants or manufacturing the final formulation, the quality of pDNA must check out. And we can help you to pass the rock phase. Our instruments are the whole package of analytical tools supporting the pDNA upstream manufacturing. With them, you can monitor the purity and quantity of pDNA, you can concentrate and buffer exchange the sample on big or small scale, and you can check out if the viscosity is in the right range. Let's start the beginning of the process. I would like to introduce to you Lunatic, which is the instrument that can help to prevent majority of the issues that I just mentioned. Our Lunatic measures full UVB spectrum and requires only 2 microliters per sample without hassle of preparing dilution steps nor standard curves. Lunatic can measure up to 96 samples at a time in just 10 minutes. Our plates have a standard SBS footprint, so they are compatible with the liquid handling products. Lunatic is the only system out there that can measure DNA at high throughput and high concentration of 0.03 to 275 OD, which corresponds in the case of pDNA to 1.5 to almost 14,000 nanograms per microliter. It uses a microfluidic circuit with 2 fixed path lengths. Once the sample is loaded, it is pulled into its reservoir area by the capillary action. Then it will hit a hydrophobic point and stop. And at this step, it can sit up to 2 hours in the plate before reading, without the risk of evaporation. After the plate is loaded into the instrument, a pump applies a small vacuum, which then moves the sample into the microcuvettes for reading. Let's see that in real action. Here we can see exactly what sample loading looks like, and we used some fluorescein and black light to see it better. In these 2 wells, we've already added 2 microliters of sample. And as you can see, after loading, sample travels through the microcapillary, where it safely waits up to 2 hours for the measurement. So this shows the sample prior and after the measurement. On the left, you can see those loaded samples, and on the right, you can see the samples after being measured with Lunatic. These two diamond shapes are the cuvettes for one sample, where the absorbance of the sample is measured with very accurate and precise path lengths. Let's take a look at some results. This is an example of pDNA measured in quadruplicate. And what usually tells us about the quality of pDNA are the absorbance ratios. Absorbance 8:60 to 8:30 should be between 2 to 2.2 or above. And absorbance 8:60 to 280 should be equal or higher than 1.8. So for this particular sample, the purity ratios check out. With some quantification techniques, trying to measure samples across both high and low concentrations can put you out of the dynamic range. But on Lunatic, which lower detection limit is 1.5 nanograms per microliter, the concentration is delivered, even if you don't have a crazy amount of the pDNA in the sample. In this graph, you can see the pDNA that was prepared in the dilution series from approximately 5 to 200 nanograms per microliter. Each sample was measured in 4 replicates. And as you can see, across of this dilution series, the recovery rate was close to 100%. Also, there are standard deviation error bars added to the graph, but they are so tiny that you can hardly see them. I don't see them, and I know they are there because I put them there. So Lunatic has very wide dynamic concentration range, and you can measure pDNA at lowest concentration and at the highest without necessity to dilute that. The goal of manufacturing is to isolate pure DNA. And what is used to do that is the alkaline lysis. This is a very standard technique to isolate pDNA from the bacterial culture. And is it done regardless of the production scale, if it's benchtop or huge manufacturing site. It is also a multi-step process that has a high potential to introduce protein, RNA, or some buffer components. How does it go? Bacteria are pelleted and then resuspended. Then the lysis and neutralization buffers are used. And after this step, the sample is centrifuged. So the cell debris, genomic DNA, some RNA and proteins are pelleted, while pDNA stays in the solution. And this is the first moment that with Lunatic, you can take a peek into the pDNA. Lunatic delivers concentration from this mix, and it gives us a chance to control if isolation is going well, or maybe something is wrong. For instance, the lysis was too short and we don't have a large amounts of the pDNA to continue. But if everything is fine, then pDNA is washed and then eluted, and the pDNA isolation is complete. And here it can be measured with the remarkable precision with Lunatic. As I mentioned, sometimes it happens that isolated pDNA can be contaminated, for instance, with buffer residues. For instance, if after the neutralization and spin, some cell debris pellet was transferred into the column, or maybe the membrane of the column was damaged, then it can happen. And we can see it in this graph. So on the left, you can see a sample which I would call close to perfect. There is a very clean spectrum and the purity ratios check out. The second sample, on contrary, is not so great. And this is because we purposely and randomly contaminated it by carrying over some cell debris pellet into the microspin column. So the purity ratios are completely off. They are too low. But just from this, we know there is something wrong, but we don't exactly know what is wrong with the sample. But Lunatic detects most common contaminants that might be present in the isolate and delivers this information. For this sample, Lunatic delivered that it's phenol and some buffer components present. So with this, you have a tool to see the contaminants that are potentially toxic to cells or can cause problems later in the manufacturing, and you can take necessary steps to avoid these problems. Finally, as I mentioned, Lunatic is compatible with the liquid handling robots. So if you deal with a lot of samples daily for high throughput needs, Lunatic can handle 960 samples in an hour via the full robot integration options. Also, to ensure the traceability in certified labs and detection of the wrong plates, it is possible via the plate tracking with the barcodes. But this is not all for how we can support pDNA manufacturing process. Stunner is our instrument that combines two technologies to deliver not only concentration and purity like Lunatic does, but also particle size information. And similarly to Lunatic, it needs only 2 microliters of sample, and the measurement time for that one sample is less than 1 minute. Stunner combines the full spectrum UV-Vis measurement with the dynamic light scattering. UV-Vis delivers information of the concentration and purity, and DLS tells you if there are aggregates or maybe degraded small pDNA fragments in your sample. And with, with this data, you have much more information and insight in your pDNA and you can decide on your next step. For example, this is the pDNA sample that was measured with DLS. You can see that it's quite polydispersed. You see these results and you see, oh, this sample needs a cleanup. And cleanup can be, for instance, as simple as passing pDNA through the molecular weight cutoff filter, or you can use some concentration and purification kits. In this case, we chose just to use molecular weight cutoff filter to get rid of the small particles. As a result, we got more homologous samples with much lower fraction of possibly fragmented pDNA, and also the dominant fraction of the particle size shifted to the bigger ones. Finally, the good PNA just looks good. If I see something like this, I'm a very happy human being. The spectrum looks neat. There are no contaminants detected. The percentage of coefficient of variation from 6 replicates in this case is low. Absorbance ratios are within the expected ranges. And finally, the sample is quite monodispersed and the PDI value is not high. So if you see a sample like this, you know that you can proceed with your process. And how can we further assist with that? First, by delivering the concentration and buffer exchange systems. If the pDNA has to be brought to a specific concentration, it can be, for instance, because is it destined to be used in the triple transfection and AAV production, or has to be in the specific buffer for a chromatography purification, we have 2 solutions for you, Unagi and Big Tuna. Unagi is a benchtop system for those who deal with fewer samples. It can handle 8 samples at a time at the volumes from 0.5 to 8 milliliters. For higher throughput, Big Tuna is a system that does up to 96 exchanges in the volume range from 0.1 to 8 milliliters. Both systems are very simple to set up, and then you can just walk away, and it means that they require less than 15 minutes of hands-on time. But concentrating pDNA means that some of its properties will change. And one of them will be viscosity. Viscosity cannot be overlooked because too high one means that you can encounter problems with downstream pDNA processes like filtration. We do have a great solution that helps to get viscosity info. Honeybun is the fastest viscometer out there. It can measure 10 samples at the same time in a minute. The default volume of the sample is 35 microliters, but we also provide a low volume mode in the software, which needs only 15 microliters. For those who have samples with some extreme viscosities, Honeybun is compatible with material up to 150 centipoises. This is an example of concentration process of pDNA accompanied with the viscosity measurement. We did it in the 2 cycles, and you can see that over these 2 cycles, the concentration went from approximately 1,000 nanograms per microliter to about 5,000. At the same time, the viscosity increased from about 2 to 6 centipoises. With our buffer exchange systems, you can easily bring up pDNA to the concentration that you need and make sure that viscosity is not a false step and will not compromise the downstream steps. Overall, manufacturing process is long and consists of many steps, but our instruments can assist in majority of them, providing a thorough insight into pDNA quality. So starting with the input material and in mid-process, Lunatic and Stunner can verify pDNA quality and quantity. Our buffer exchange systems bring up pDNA to a desired concentration and in the right buffer, and Honeybun supplements this step with viscosity info. Finally, during and after purification, Stunner tells if pDNA is pure at the right concentration and without aggregates or fragments to enter the downstream phase. With the right tools, reaching the top can be easy. For pDNA production, that can be efficiently producing pDNA with no missteps. Our instruments are the full set of a climbing gear that you need to keep a pDNA manufacturing process under control at multiple steps. And with that, thank you very much for your attention. And let's see if Kevin has any questions for me.
All right, thank you, Joanna, for taking us through how to use Lunatic to quantify plasmid DNA samples rapidly, accurately, and with just that 2 microliters of sample. Also, how to look out for chemical contaminants by UniVis or use DLS to check size for the presence of aggregates, and how to use buffer exchange, automated buffer exchange for sample concentration. And then lastly, looking at how to rapidly check viscosity with the minimal sample volume. We have some great questions that have already been submitted. And for those of you in the audience, you can still ask a question by entering it into the Q&A section of your Zoom navigation bar. So firstly, which contaminants can you detect on Lunatic or Stunner?
On Lunatic and Stunner, UV-Vis is measured in a full spectrum from 230 to 750 nanometers. So anything that absorbs will be detected. So we do have a dedicated apps, they are called Unmix, which take care of the most common contaminants in the pDNA sample, like common buffer components. So you can still quantify the pDNA present in your sample. Okay.
And when you're doing that kind of quantification, do you need any dyes or standards to measure nucleic acids? What about highly concentrated samples?
Mm-hmm. No, Lunatic and Stunner are dye and standard free. The only thing you need really to do is to pipette 2 microliters of your sample and you're ready to go. And because of this very dynamic range from 0.03 to 275 OD, you really don't need to dilute any of your samples.
All right. And then, so showed a lot of instruments today. Are all instruments automation friendly?
Lunatic, Stunner, and Big Tuna can be fully automated. Unagi and Honeyban have to be operated manually. However, for both of these instruments, it means that you need to pipette your sample, place the consumable into the instrument, and then set it up like how you want it. And this process takes no more than a few minutes. And the rest is done automatically. You got the pop-up results on your screen.
Okay. So the next question is, again, focusing on the buffer exchange systems. It's asking, which buffer exchange system should you choose? How do you pick one?
So it will be up to you, and it will be dependent on the scale of your process. If you need to handle just a few samples a day, then Unagi is the benchtop solution, and it can run 8 samples at a time in the volume from 0.5 to 8 milliliters. But for the higher throughput and automation, we would recommend Big Tuna. Now, Big Tuna has 2 consumables, a 24-well plate that can hold 0.45 to 8 milliliters. And we also have a 96-well plate consumable that can hold 100 to 450 microliters of the sample.
Okay, so it's all about throughput and volume. All right, so last question that I see here in the list is, how long does it take to measure a full plate on Lunatic and Stunner?
4 hours. Well, I'm joking. So it's super, super fast. Lunatic and Stunner perform UV-Vis measurement of 96 samples in 10 minutes. If you want to add DLS data on Stunner, then the total measurement time is approximately an hour.
Okay. So thank you for answering all those great questions, Joanna, and thank you for a great presentation. I also want to thank all of you who joined us live today. If you would like to have a deeper conversation with our team, please do get in touch with us at info@unchainedlabs.com or learn more at our website, unchainedlabs.com. We would love to connect and talk science with you. So thanks again for attending our virtual seminar, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.